Officer Sarah Martinez sat in her patrol car outside the 24-hour diner on Main Street. The clock on her dashboard showed 11:30 p.m. It was a quiet Tuesday night in the small town of Riverside. Most people were already home, getting ready for bed or watching late-night TV shows. Sarah had been a police officer for 8 years. She knew this town like the back of her hand. She grew up here, went to high school here, and decided to stay to serve her community. Her parents still lived just 10 minutes away from the police station. The radio in her car was quiet. Only a few calls had come in during her shift. A noise complaint from Mrs. Johnson about her neighbor's dog. A minor fender bender in the grocery store parking lot. Nothing too serious. Sarah liked the quiet nights, but she also knew they could change in a second. She took a sip of her coffee and looked out at the empty street. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. A few cars passed by, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Everyone seemed to be driving normally, following the speed limit, staying in their lanes. Sarah thought about her daughter Emma, who was probably asleep by now. Emma was 7 years old and always asked her mom about her job.
"Do you catch bad guys, Mommy?"
Emma would ask. Sarah would tell her that most of the time she helped people and kept everyone safe. The bad guys were just part of the job. The radio crackled to life, breaking the silence in the car. Sarah reached for the handset. "Unit 23, this is dispatch," came the voice of Janet, the night dispatcher. Janet had been working at the police station for 15 years. She knew every officer by their voice and always stayed calm. Even during busy nights. "Unit 23 here." "Go ahead, Janet," Sarah replied. "We have a report of an erratic driver on Highway 9, near mile marker 15. Multiple callers reporting a black sedan weaving between lanes and driving very slowly. Last seen heading east toward the bridge." Sarah put down her coffee and started her engine. Highway 9 was one of the main roads through town. It connected Riverside to the bigger city about 30 miles away. During the day, it was busy with commuter traffic. At night, it was mostly empty except for a few late-night travelers. "Copy that, dispatch. I'm about 5 minutes from that location. Any description of the vehicle?" "Black 4-door sedan, looks like it might be a newer model. License plate unknown. Be careful out there, Sarah." Sarah pulled out of the diner parking lot and headed toward Highway 9. She knew this road well. There had been several accidents on this stretch over the years. The road curved around a small hill and there was a steep drop-off on one side. If someone was driving erratically, it could be very dangerous. As she drove, Sarah thought about the possible reasons for erratic driving. Sometimes it was just someone who was tired after a long day at work. Other times it could be someone who was sick or having a medical emergency. But often, especially late at night, it meant the driver had been drinking. Sarah had handled many drunk driving cases during her career. She never got used to it. She had seen too many accidents, too many families torn apart by someone's decision to drink and drive. Just last year, a drunk driver had hit a family of 4 on this same highway. The parents survived, but their 2 young children did not. She turned onto Highway 9 and started looking for the black sedan. The road was dark, with only a few streetlights along the way. She slowed down and scanned both sides of the road. Sometimes erratic drivers pulled over when they realized they were having trouble. About 2 miles down the road, Sarah saw taillights ahead of her. The car was moving slowly, much slower than the speed limit. As she got closer, she could see it was indeed a black sedan. The car was drifting slightly to the right, then back to the left. It wasn't staying in its lane properly. Sarah followed at a safe distance and observed the vehicle. The driver seemed to be having trouble maintaining a steady speed. The car would slow down, then suddenly speed up, then slow down again. Once, the car drifted so far to the right that the tires went onto the shoulder of the road. She reached for her radio. "Dispatch, Unit 23. I have visual on the reported vehicle. Black sedan, license plate." Sarah squinted to read the plate in the darkness. "License plate Henry Thomas 90472. Vehicle is definitely driving erratically. I'm going to initiate a traffic stop. Copy that, Unit 23. Backup is available if needed." Sarah turned on her emergency lights. The red and blue flashing lights lit up the darkness behind the sedan. She expected the car to pull over quickly, like most drivers did when they saw police lights, but this car didn't stop right away. The sedan continued driving for almost a quarter mile before it finally started to slow down. It pulled over, but not in a straight line. The car wobbled as it moved to the shoulder, and when it finally stopped, it was parked at an angle. One wheel was still on the white line of the road. Sarah parked her patrol car behind the sedan, leaving enough space for safety. She turned on her spotlight and pointed it toward the back window of the car. She could see the silhouette of one person in the driver's seat. Before getting out of her car, Sarah called in the traffic stop. Dispatch Unit 23. Traffic stop initiated on Highway 9. Mile marker 16, one occupant visible. Copy. Unit 23, time is 11:47 p.m. Sarah grabbed her flashlight and stepped out of her patrol car. The night air was cool and she could hear the distant sound of traffic from the interstate. She walked slowly toward the driver's side of the sedan, keeping her flashlight pointed down to avoid blinding the driver. As she approached the car, she could see the driver's window was already rolled down. That was unusual. Most people waited for the officer to ask them to roll down their window. She could also hear the engine still running, which meant the driver had not turned off the car. When Sarah reached the driver's window, she pointed her flashlight toward the ground and leaned down slightly to speak to the driver. What she saw confirmed her suspicions. The man behind the wheel looked confused and disoriented. His eyes were red and watery, and she could immediately smell something that made her heart sink. The strong smell of alcohol filled the air around the car. It was unmistakable. Sarah had smelled it hundreds of times before during traffic stops. The driver had definitely been drinking, and from the smell, he had been drinking a lot. The man looked up at her with unfocused eyes. He was well-dressed, wearing a dark suit and tie even at this late hour. He appeared to be in his 50s with gray hair and a face that looked familiar, though Sarah couldn't place where she might have seen him before. "Good evening, sir," Sarah said in her professional voice. "I'm Officer Martinez with the Riverside Police Department. The reason I stopped you tonight is because I received reports of erratic driving. License and registration, please." The man stared at her for a moment as if he was trying to process what she had said. Then he reached toward his jacket pocket, his movements slow and unsteady. The man fumbled around in his jacket pocket for what seemed like a long time. Sarah watched as he struggled to find his wallet. His movements were slow and clumsy. When he finally pulled out his wallet, he dropped it on the floor of the car. Sorry, the man mumbled as he bent down to pick up his wallet. His words were slurred, and Sarah could tell he was having trouble speaking clearly. When he sat back up, he was breathing heavily, as if bending over had been difficult for him. Sarah waited patiently while the man opened his wallet. She could see his hands shaking as he tried to pull out his driver's license. The smell of alcohol was getting stronger. She had to step back slightly because it was so overwhelming. "Here you go, officer," the man said, finally handing her his license. When Sarah took it from him, she noticed his hand was trembling. The license was slightly bent and it felt damp with sweat. "Thank you, sir. I also need your vehicle registration and insurance card," Sarah said. The man stared at her blankly for a moment. "Registration?" he repeated as if he didn't understand what she was asking for. "Yes, sir. Your vehicle registration. It's usually kept in the glove compartment or with your insurance papers." The man turned toward the passenger side of the car and reached for the glove compartment. He had trouble opening it at first, pressing the wrong button several times. When it finally opened, papers scattered everywhere. Some fell on the floor, and others landed on the passenger seat. This is very embarrassing," the man said, gathering up the papers with both hands. He was clearly having trouble focusing on the task. Sarah could see him squinting at each piece of paper, trying to read what it was. While he searched for his registration, Sarah took a closer look at his driver's license using her flashlight. The photo showed the same man, but he looked much more put together in the picture. The name on the license read, Robert J. Thornton. The address was in the expensive part of town where many of the local professionals lived. Sarah tried to remember if she had heard that name before. It sounded familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. She made a mental note to run the license through the computer system when she got back to her patrol car. "Found it," the man announced, holding up a piece of paper. But when he handed it to Sarah, she saw it was actually his insurance card, not his registration. "This is your insurance card. Mr. Thornton, I still need your vehicle registration." The man looked confused again. He stared at the papers in his lap, then back at Sarah. I thought that was what you wanted." Sarah realized this was going to take a while. The man was clearly impaired and having trouble with simple tasks. She decided to move things along. "Mr. Thornton, have you been drinking tonight?" she asked directly. The man's eyes widened and he sat up straighter in his seat. "Drinking? No, officer. I don't drink and drive." That would be against the law. He said this as if he was trying to convince himself as much as her. Sir, I can smell alcohol on your breath and coming from your vehicle. How much have you had to drink tonight? The man was quiet for a long moment. Sarah could see him thinking, trying to come up with an answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. I had dinner with some colleagues tonight. We might have had a glass of wine with our meal. But that was hours ago. I'm perfectly fine to drive. Sarah had heard this story many times before. People often thought that having just one drink or drinking hours ago meant they were safe to drive. They didn't understand how alcohol affected their bodies or how long it stayed in their system. Mr. Thornton, what time did you finish dinner? Sarah asked. The man thought for a moment. Maybe around 9 o'clock, or was it 10? I'm not really sure. Sarah looked at her watch. It was almost midnight. Even if he had stopped drinking at 10 o'clock, that was only 2 hours ago. And based on the strong smell of alcohol, Sarah suspected he had consumed much more than one glass of wine. Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, Sarah said. Step out? Why do I need to step out? I told you I'm fine to drive. The man's tone was becoming more defensive. I need to conduct some field sobriety tests to determine if you're safe to drive. Please turn off your engine and step out of the car. The man hesitated. Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not some common drunk driver. I'm a respected member of this community. I think we can handle this situation differently. Sarah had heard this type of response before too. Some people thought their job or status in the community should protect them from the law, but Sarah knew that drunk driving laws applied to everyone equally. Sir, everyone gets treated the same way during a traffic stop. Please turn off your engine and step out of the vehicle. The man looked frustrated. Do you know who I am? He asked, his voice getting louder. Yes, sir. According to your license, you're Robert J. Thornton. Now please step out of the car. That's Judge Thornton, the man said, emphasizing the word, judge. I work at the courthouse. I sentence people I handle these types of cases all the time. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Judge Thornton. Now she remembered where she had heard that name. She had testified in his courtroom several times over the years. He was known for being tough on drunk drivers. He often gave harsh sentences and would lecture defendants about the dangers of drinking and driving. But Sarah knew that being a judge didn't mean he was above the law. If anything, it meant he should know better than anyone how serious drunk driving was. Judge Thornton, I still need you to step out of the vehicle for field sobriety tests, Sarah said, keeping her voice professional. This is ridiculous, Judge Thornton said, but he reached for the door handle. I can't believe I'm being treated like a common criminal. When Judge Thornton opened the car door, the smell of alcohol became even stronger. Sarah had to take another step back. As he tried to get out of the car, he grabbed onto the doorframe for support. His legs seemed unsteady, and he had to lean against the car to keep his balance. Are you feeling all right, sir? Sarah asked. I'm fine, Judge Thornton insisted, but Sarah could see he was struggling to stand up straight. I just need a moment to get my bearings. Sarah waited as Judge Thornton closed the car door and turned to face her. In the light from her flashlight, she could see that his face was flushed red, and his eyes were bloodshot. His hair was messy and his tie was crooked. This was very different from the well-groomed, authoritative figure she remembered seeing in the courtroom. Judge Thornton, I'm going to conduct 3 field sobriety tests. These tests are designed to check your balance, coordination, and ability to follow instructions. Do you have any injuries or medical conditions that might affect your ability to perform these tests? Judge Thornton shook his head, then seemed to regret the movement. He put his hand to his forehead and closed his eyes for a moment. No injuries, he said quietly. Sarah positioned her patrol car so that the headlights would provide enough light for the tests. She also turned on her body camera to record everything that was about to happen. She knew that with someone as prominent as Judge Thornton, everything needed to be documented properly. The first test is called the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, Sarah explained. I'm going to hold up my pen and I want you to follow it with your eyes without moving your head. Judge Thornton nodded, though he was swaying slightly as he stood there. Sarah could tell this was not going to go well. Sarah held up her pen about 12 inches from Judge Thornton's face. The pen had a small light on the end that would help her see his eye movements clearly. Judge Thornton was swaying slightly. trying to keep his balance while standing still. Keep your head still and follow the pen with just your eyes, Sarah instructed. She moved the pen slowly from the center to the right side of his face. Judge Thornton's eyes followed the pen, but Sarah could see something that confirmed her suspicions. His eyes were jerking back and forth in small, quick movements. This was called nystagmus, and it was one of the clearest signs that someone had been drinking too much alcohol. Now follow it to the left, Sarah said, moving the pen to the other side. Again, Judge Thornton's eyes showed the same jerking movements. When Sarah moved the pen all the way to the side, the jerking became even more obvious. She also noticed that he was having trouble keeping his head completely still. It kept moving slightly as he tried to follow the pen. Okay, that's the first test, Sarah said, putting her pen away. The second test is called the walk and turn test. I'm going to explain it first, then demonstrate it, and then you'll perform it. Judge Thornton nodded, but he looked nervous. Sarah could see sweat forming on his forehead, even though the night air was cool. I want you to place your left foot on this imaginary line, Sarah said, pointing to a crack in the pavement that would serve as a straight line. Then place your right foot in front of it, heel to toe. Keep your arms at your sides and listen to my instructions. Judge Thornton looked down at the pavement, trying to find the line Sarah was talking about. He took a step forward, but instead of placing his heel against his toe, there was a gap of several inches between his feet. Heel to toe, Sarah reminded him. Your right heel should touch your left toe. Judge Thornton tried to adjust his position, but he wobbled and had to put his arms out to keep from falling over. This is harder than it looks, he muttered. During the instruction phase, you need to stay in this position until I tell you to begin, Sarah explained. Now, when I say start, you're going to take 9 heel-to-toe steps down this line, turn around in a specific way, and take 9 heel-to-toe steps back. Do you understand? Yes, I understand, Judge Thornton said, but he was already having trouble maintaining the starting position. His arms kept moving out from his sides to help him balance. Remember, keep your arms at your sides, watch your feet, and count your steps out loud, Sarah said. Begin. Judge Thornton started walking, but almost immediately Sarah could see multiple problems. First, he wasn't walking heel to toe. There were gaps between his feet with each step. Second, he kept raising his arms for balance. Third, he stopped after only 6 steps instead of 9. How many steps was that? Sarah asked. Judge Thornton looked confused. 9, he guessed. That was 6. You need to take 9 steps, then turn around and come back. Judge Thornton continued walking, but he took 3 more steps and stopped again. Is that 9? He asked. Yes, now you need to turn around, Sarah said. Turn in a series of small steps, keeping 1 foot on the line at all times. Instead of turning in small steps, Judge Thornton tried to pivot around quickly. He lost his balance and stumbled to the side, nearly falling over. He had to put both arms out to steady himself. I'm sorry, he said, breathing heavily. Can I try that again? I think I misunderstood the instructions. The test is complete, Sarah said. Let's move on to the third test. Judge Thornton looked disappointed. Sarah could tell he was beginning to realize how poorly he was doing on these tests. His confident attitude from earlier was starting to fade. The third test is called the one-leg stand, Sarah explained. You're going to stand on 1 foot while holding the other foot about 6 inches off the ground. Keep your arms at your sides and count out loud from 1001 to 1030. 30 seconds? Judge Thornton asked. I have to stand on 1 foot for 30 seconds? Yes, sir. You can choose which foot to stand on. Are you ready? Judge Thornton looked down at his feet as if trying to decide which one would be better. I guess I'll stand on my right foot, he said. Go ahead and begin, Sarah said. Judge Thornton lifted his left foot off the ground, but he immediately started swaying back and forth. 1001, 1002. He began counting, but his voice was shaky. After just 5 seconds, he put his left foot down. Sorry, let me try again. Keep going, Sarah said. Don't stop. Judge Thornton lifted his foot again. 1006, 1007. But again, after only a few seconds, he lost his balance and put his foot down. This is impossible, he said, frustrated. I can't do this even when I'm sober. Sarah made notes on her pad about everything she had observed. Judge Thornton had failed all 3 field sobriety tests. The evidence was clear that he was impaired and should not be driving. Judge Thornton, based on your performance on these tests, I believe you are under the influence of alcohol, Sarah said. I'm placing you under arrest for driving under the influence. Judge Thornton's face went pale. Arrest? You're going to arrest me? Officer, surely we can work something out. I made a mistake tonight, but arresting me will ruin my career. I'm a judge. I have a reputation to protect. Sarah had heard similar pleas before, but she knew she had to do her job regardless of who the person was. Sir, I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. Wait, Judge Thornton said, his voice becoming more desperate. You don't understand. I sentence drunk drivers all the time. I know how serious this is, but if this gets out, it will destroy everything I've worked for. Sarah felt some sympathy for Judge Thornton, but she also thought about all the people he had sentenced over the years. Had he shown them the same consideration he was asking for now? Had he listened when they pleaded about their jobs and reputations? Sir, please turn around, Sarah said firmly. Judge Thornton looked like he might cry. My wife doesn't even know I went out tonight. She thinks I'm working late at the office. What am I going to tell her? You'll have a chance to make a phone call at the station, Sarah said. Right now I need you to turn around so I can place you under arrest. Reluctantly, Judge Thornton turned around. Sarah could see his shoulders shaking as she approached with her handcuffs. She had arrested hundreds of people during her career, but this felt different. This was someone she had seen in court, someone who was supposed to uphold the law. You have the right to remain silent, Sarah began as she placed the handcuffs on Judge Thornton's wrists. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. As she recited the Miranda rights, Judge Thornton stood quietly. All his earlier protests and attempts to use his position had stopped. He seemed to finally understand that he was being treated like any other person who had been caught drinking and driving. Do you understand these rights? Sarah asked. Yes, Judge Thornton said quietly. Sarah guided him to her patrol car and helped him into the back seat. The back of police cars were designed for prisoners, with hard plastic seats and no door handles on the inside. Judge Thornton looked around the small space with obvious discomfort. Before closing the door, Sarah leaned down to speak to him. Judge Thornton, we're going to go to the station now. You'll have a chance to take a breath test there, and you can call someone to come get you after you're processed. Judge Thornton nodded but didn't say anything. Sarah could see tears in his eyes. As Sarah walked back to the driver's seat, she thought about how strange this situation was. She had testified in Judge Thornton's courtroom many times. She had watched him sentence people for the exact same crime he had just committed. She wondered what he was thinking now, sitting in the back of her patrol car. Sarah got into the driver's seat and radioed dispatch. Unit 23 to dispatch. I have one subject in custody for DUI. We're heading to the station for processing. Copy. Unit 23, good work out there. As they drove toward the police station, Sarah glanced in her rearview mirror at Judge Thornton. He was staring out the window with a blank expression on his face. She wondered if he was thinking about all the people he had sentenced, or if he was worried about what would happen to his career. The drive to the station would take about 10 minutes. In that time, both Sarah and Judge Thornton would have plenty to think about. Neither of them knew that this arrest would become one of the biggest news stories in their small town's history. The police station was quiet when Sarah pulled into the parking lot. Only a few cars were there, belonging to the night shift officers and dispatchers. The building looked small and ordinary from the outside, but Sarah knew that what happened inside tonight would change many lives forever. Sarah parked her patrol car in the designated spot and turned off the engine. She looked in the rearview mirror at Judge Thornton, who was still staring out the window. He hadn't said a word during the entire drive to the station. We're here, Judge Thornton, Sarah said. I'm going to help you out of the car now. Judge Thornton nodded slowly. When Sarah opened the back door, she could see that he looked exhausted. The confident, demanding man from the traffic stop was gone. Now he just looked like someone who had made a terrible mistake and was beginning to understand the consequences. Sarah helped Judge Thornton out of the car, being careful because his hands were still handcuffed behind his back. They walked slowly toward the station entrance. Judge Thornton stumbled slightly on the steps, and Sarah had to steady him with her hand on his arm. Inside the station, the desk sergeant, Officer Mike Rodriguez, looked up from his paperwork. Mike had been working at the station for 12 years and had seen just about everything. But when he saw Sarah walking in with a man in handcuffs wearing an expensive suit, he raised his eyebrows. What do we have here, Martinez? Mike asked. DUI arrest, Sarah replied. Need to process him and get a breath test. Mike grabbed the necessary paperwork and gestured toward the processing area. Room 2 is open. Back machine is ready to go. Sarah led Judge Thornton to the small room where they conducted breath alcohol tests. The room was plain and sterile, with white walls and bright fluorescent lights. In the center of the room was a table with the breathalyzer machine, a computer for recording results, and a video camera to document the process. Have a seat, Sarah said, pointing to a plastic chair next to the table. Judge Thornton sat down heavily. Sarah could see that the reality of his situation was really hitting him now. He was in a police station, in handcuffs, about to take a test that would determine his legal fate. Sarah began the standard pre-test procedures. She had done this hundreds of times before, but she was extra careful tonight because she knew this case would be scrutinized closely. Judge Thornton, I'm going to observe you for 15 minutes before administering the breath test, Sarah explained. During this time, you cannot eat, drink, smoke, or put anything in your mouth. This is to ensure an accurate test result. Judge Thornton nodded. Officer Martinez, he said quietly, may I ask you something? What is it? How many DUI cases have you worked on? Sarah thought for a moment. Probably several hundred over the years. Judge Thornton was quiet for a moment. I've sentenced most of them, he said. Every Tuesday and Thursday, my courtroom is full of people who made the same mistake I made tonight. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. She continued with her paperwork while keeping an eye on Judge Thornton during the observation period. Do you remember testifying in my courtroom? Judge Thornton asked. Yes, sir. Several times. I always tried to be fair, he said. But I was also tough on drunk drivers. I believed that strict sentences would deter people from making this choice. He paused. I guess I thought I was different. That I would never be in this situation. The 15-minute observation period passed quietly. Judge Thornton seemed lost in his own thoughts, probably thinking about all the people he had sentenced and wondering what his own sentence would be. When the time was up, Sarah prepared the breathalyzer machine. She checked to make sure it was calibrated properly and that all the connections were secure. She also started the video camera to record the test. Judge Thornton, I'm going to explain how this test works, Sarah said. When I tell you to blow, I want you to take a deep breath and blow into this tube as hard and as long as you can. Keep blowing until I tell you to stop. Judge Thornton looked at the machine nervously. What happens if I refuse to take the test? In this state, refusing the breath test results in an automatic license suspension for 1 year, regardless of whether you're convicted of DUI or not, Sarah explained. Judge Thornton knew the law. He had explained it to defendants many times from his position on the bench. I'll take the test, he said. Sarah handed him the tube that connected to the breathalyzer machine. Are you ready? Judge Thornton took the tube with shaking hands. Yes. Take a deep breath and blow as hard as you can. Start now. Judge Thornton took a deep breath and began blowing into the tube. Sarah watched the machine's display, which showed the flow rate and volume of air being processed. After about 6 seconds, she told him to stop. The machine processed the breath sample for what seemed like a long time. Both Sarah and Judge Thornton watched the display, waiting for the result. Finally, numbers appeared on the screen. Blood alcohol content. 0.12. Sarah read aloud. Judge Thornton closed his eyes and put his head in his hands. In their state, the legal limit for driving was 0.08. A reading of 0.12 meant he was significantly over the limit. There was no question that he had been too drunk to drive safely. The machine will run a second test to confirm the result, Sarah said. 2 minutes later, they repeated the process. The second test showed a result of 0.11, which was close enough to the first reading to confirm that Judge Thornton was well above the legal limit. Sarah completed the paperwork and printed out the official test results. As she worked, she found herself looking more closely at Judge Thornton's driver's license and personal information. That's when something clicked in her memory. Judge Robert J. Thornton. She had definitely testified in his courtroom before, but now seeing his full name and address, she remembered something specific. About 6 months ago, she had testified in a case involving a young woman named Lisa Chen who had been arrested for DUI. Lisa was a college student who had made a mistake after a party. Sarah remembered that Judge Thornton had been particularly harsh with Lisa. He had sentenced her to the maximum fine, community service, and had given her a stern lecture about responsibility and the dangers of drunk driving. Lisa had cried during the sentencing, explaining that she was about to graduate and worried about how the conviction would affect her future career. Judge Thornton had shown no sympathy. "Young lady," he had said from the bench, "your age and your future plans are not an excuse for endangering innocent lives. The law applies to everyone equally, and you must face the consequences of your poor decision." Now, sitting in the police station processing room, Judge Thornton was facing his own consequences for the exact same crime. Sarah finished the paperwork and looked at Judge Thornton. "The test results confirm that you were driving under the influence. Your blood alcohol content is significantly above the legal limit." Judge Thornton nodded. He seemed resigned to his fate now. "What happens next?" "You'll be booked and processed. Your vehicle has been impounded. You can make a phone call to arrange for someone to pick you up after you're released." "Released? I thought I would have to stay in jail." "For a first-time DUI with no accidents or injuries, you'll likely be released on your own recognizance with a court date," Sarah explained. "However, that decision will be made by the booking sergeant." Judge Thornton looked relieved, but then his expression changed to worry again. "Officer Martinez, what are the chances that this will stay quiet? I mean, is there any way this won't become public knowledge?" Sarah knew that was unlikely. Arrest records were public information, and Judge Thornton was a prominent figure in the community. When reporters checked the daily arrest logs, his name would definitely stand out. "I can't make any promises about that," Sarah said honestly. "Arrest records are generally public information." Judge Thornton put his head in his hands again. "My career is over," he said quietly. 23 years on the bench, and it's all going to end because of one stupid night." Sarah felt some sympathy for him, but she also thought about all the people whose lives had been affected by his harsh sentences. Many of them had probably said similar things about their own careers and futures. "Judge Thornton, I need to take you to booking now," Sarah said. As they walked down the hallway toward the booking area, Sarah thought about how strange this whole situation was. In a few weeks or months, Judge Thornton would probably have to appear in the same courthouse where he had worked for over 2 decades. But this time, he would be sitting at the defendant's table instead of behind the judge's bench. The irony was not lost on either of them. The man who had built his reputation on being tough on drunk drivers was now facing the same charges he had handed down to hundreds of other people. And Sarah, who had testified in his courtroom many times, was now the officer who had arrested him. As they reached the booking area, Sarah wondered what Judge Thornton was thinking. Was he regretting his decision to drink and drive? Was he thinking about all the people he had sentenced? Or was he just worried about his own future? Whatever he was thinking, there was no going back now. The breath test results were official, and Judge Thornton's fate was now in the hands of the same legal system he had served for most of his adult life. Officer Mike Rodriguez looked up from his computer screen when Sarah brought Judge Thornton into the booking area. Mike had been processing arrests for 12 years, but he could tell this one was different. The man in handcuffs was wearing an expensive suit and looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a jail cell. "Name?" Mike asked, his fingers ready on the keyboard. "Robert James Thornton," Judge Thornton replied quietly. Mike typed the name into the computer system. When the information populated on his screen, his eyes widened. He looked up at Judge Thornton, then at Sarah, then back at his computer screen. "Judge Robert Thornton?" Mike asked, his voice showing his surprise. "Yes," Judge Thornton said, even more quietly than before. Mike had been in court many times over the years, testifying in cases that went to trial. He recognized Judge Thornton now. This was the judge known for giving tough sentences to drunk drivers. Mike remembered sitting in the courtroom gallery and watching Judge Thornton lecture defendants about the dangers of drinking and driving. Sarah could see the recognition in Mike's eyes. She knew that word would spread quickly through the police station. Officers talked to each other, especially about unusual arrests. By morning, everyone in the department would know that they had arrested Judge Thornton for DUI. Mike continued with the booking process, but Sarah could tell he was being extra careful with the paperwork. He knew this arrest would be reviewed closely by supervisors, lawyers, and probably the media. "Any medical conditions or medications?" Mike asked. "High blood pressure medication," Judge Thornton replied. "And I take something for acid reflux." Mike noted this information in the computer. "Any injuries or complaints of pain?" No. The booking process continued with fingerprints and photographs. Judge Thornton looked uncomfortable during the mugshot photos. He was used to being the authority figure in official settings, not the person being processed through the criminal justice system. After the booking was complete, Mike called his supervisor, Sergeant Williams. "Sarge, you need to know about the DUI arrest Martinez brought in tonight." "What about it?" Sergeant Williams asked over the phone. "It's Judge Thornton from the courthouse." There was a long pause on the phone. "Judge Robert Thornton? The one who handles most of our DUI cases?" "That's the one. I'll be right there." Sergeant Williams arrived at the station 15 minutes later. He was a 20-year veteran of the department who had worked with Judge Thornton on hundreds of cases over the years. Williams reviewed Sarah's arrest report and the breathalyzer results. "This is solid police work, Martinez," Sergeant Williams said. "You followed all the proper procedures." "Thank you, Sergeant. But you know this is going to create a huge situation, right? Judge Thornton is one of the most well-known figures in our courthouse." Sarah nodded. She had been thinking about that all night. Sergeant Williams called the police chief at home. Chief Peterson had been sleeping, but Williams knew this was important enough to wake him up. "Chief, it's Williams. Sorry to call so late, but we have a situation you need to know about." Chief Peterson listened as Williams explained the arrest. There was a long silence on the phone. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Chief Peterson asked. "I've reviewed everything. Martinez did everything by the book. The evidence is solid. I'll be there in 20 minutes. While they waited for the chief to arrive, Judge Thornton was allowed to make his phone call. He sat in a small room with a telephone, trying to decide who to call. His wife would be asleep, and he didn't want to wake her with this news. His adult children lived in other cities. Finally, he decided to call his brother, who lived about an hour away. "David, it's Robert. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need your help." Judge Thornton explained the situation to his brother, who was shocked. "You were arrested for drunk driving? Robert, you're the judge who sends people to jail for that." "I know," Judge Thornton said. "I made a terrible mistake. Can you come get me?" "Of course. I'll be there as soon as I can." After the phone call, Judge Thornton sat alone in the small room waiting. He thought about his career and everything he had worked for. He had been a judge for 15 years, and before that, he had been a prosecutor for 8 years. His entire adult life had been dedicated to the law. Now, in one night, he had potentially destroyed everything. Chief Peterson arrived at the station and immediately went into a meeting with Sergeant Williams and Sarah. The chief was a careful man who had run the department for 10 years without any major scandals. "Walk me through everything that happened," Chief Peterson said to Sarah. Sarah explained the entire evening, from the initial call about an erratic driver to the arrest and breathalyzer test. Chief Peterson asked detailed questions about each step of the process. "Did Judge Thornton try to use his position to avoid arrest?" the chief asked. "He mentioned that he was a judge and suggested we could handle this differently. But I continued with standard procedure," Sarah replied. "Good. Did you treat him exactly the same way you would treat any other DUI suspect?" "Yes, sir. I followed the same procedures I use for every DUI arrest." Chief Peterson was satisfied that Sarah had handled everything properly. But he knew this arrest would create problems for the department. Judge Thornton worked closely with the police on many cases. Defense attorneys would probably claim that the police had a conflict of interest. "We need to transfer this case to the state police," Chief Peterson decided. "We can't have our department investigating someone we work with regularly." The chief also knew that news of the arrest would spread quickly. Police departments were not good at keeping secrets, especially when the arrest involved someone famous. At 3:30 a.m., Judge Thornton's brother David arrived at the police station. David was a quiet man who worked as an accountant. He rarely got involved in his brother's legal career, but he was shocked by this situation. "Where is he?" David asked at the front desk. Officer Rodriguez explained that Judge Thornton was being released and brought him to the lobby area. When Judge Thornton saw his brother, he looked embarrassed and grateful at the same time. "Thank you for coming," Judge Thornton said quietly. David didn't say much during the drive home. He was still trying to process what had happened. His brother had always been the successful one in the family, the one who lectured everyone else about following rules and making good choices. "What are you going to do?" David finally asked. "I don't know," Judge Thornton replied. "I need to call my lawyer in the morning, and I need to figure out how to tell my wife. She's going to find out anyway. This kind of news doesn't stay secret. Judge Thornton knew his brother was right. In a small town like Riverside, news traveled fast. And when the news involved a prominent figure like a judge being arrested for drunk driving, it would spread even faster. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Officer Rodriguez was finishing his shift paperwork. Part of his routine was to email the daily arrest log to the local newspaper. The newspaper used this information to publish a weekly report of arrests in their crime section. Rodriguez looked at the arrest log for the night. Most of the names were people he didn't recognize, but Judge Thornton's name stood out immediately. Rodriguez knew that when the newspaper reporter saw this name on the arrest log, it would become a much bigger story than just a line in the crime report. By 6 a.m., the day shift officers were arriving at the station. Word of Judge Thornton's arrest had already spread among the night shift, and now it was spreading to the day shift officers as well. Officer Janet Kim, who had testified in Judge Thornton's courtroom just 2 weeks earlier, couldn't believe the news. "Are you sure it's the same Judge Thornton?" she asked Rodriguez. "I processed him myself," Rodriguez confirmed. "Same guy who sentenced half the drunk drivers in this county." Officer Kim shook her head. "This is going to be huge news. Judge Thornton was always so tough on DUI cases. I remember him giving this speech to a defendant about how drunk driving was inexcusable and showed a complete disregard for human life." Similar conversations were happening throughout the police station as more officers arrived for work. Everyone had a story about appearing in Judge Thornton's courtroom or about his reputation for harsh sentences in drunk driving cases. Sarah was finishing her shift report when her sergeant approached her. "Martinez, I want you to know that you did excellent work tonight. You followed all procedures correctly, and you treated Judge Thornton exactly the same way you would treat any other suspect." "Thank you, Sergeant. But I also want you to be prepared. This is going to become a very public case. You might have reporters calling you or trying to interview you. Don't talk to any media without approval from the chief." Sarah nodded. She was already thinking about how strange it would be to testify against Judge Thornton in court, when she had testified for the prosecution in his courtroom so many times before. As Sarah drove home from work, she thought about the events of the night. When she had responded to the call about an erratic driver, she never could have imagined that it would lead to arresting one of the most prominent figures in the local legal community. She also thought about all the people Judge Thornton had sentenced over the years. Many of them had probably stood in his courtroom and tried to explain their mistakes, just like Judge Thornton had tried to explain his mistake to her during the traffic stop. Rebecca Walsh, a reporter for the Riverside Daily News, arrived at work Wednesday morning with her usual cup of coffee and stack of notes from the night before. Part of her daily routine was checking the police arrest log that came in by email every morning. Usually it contained minor crimes, traffic violations, and the occasional domestic dispute. As Rebecca scrolled through the list of names, one entry made her stop completely. She read it again to make sure she wasn't mistaken. Robert J. Thornton, driving under the influence. Blood alcohol 0.12. Rebecca had covered the courthouse for 3 years. She knew Judge Robert Thornton well. He was the judge who handled most DUI cases in the county, and he was famous for his tough sentences and stern lectures to defendants. She immediately called her editor, Tom Morrison. "Tom, you're not going to believe this. Judge Thornton was arrested for drunk driving last night." "Judge Robert Thornton? Are you sure?" "It's right here on the police arrest log. Blood alcohol of 0.12, which is way over the legal limit." Tom knew this was a huge story. "Get down to the police station right now. Try to get more details about the arrest, and see if you can reach Judge Thornton for comment." Rebecca spent the morning trying to gather information. The police department wouldn't give her any details beyond the basic arrest report. Chief Peterson had instructed all officers not to talk to the media about the case. But Rebecca had sources throughout the community. She called contacts at the courthouse, at local law firms, and among court staff. Word was already spreading about Judge Thornton's arrest. By noon, Rebecca had written the first version of her story. The headline read, "Local Judge Arrested for Drunk Driving." The article included Judge Thornton's blood alcohol level, details about his reputation for harsh DUI sentences, and reactions from people in the legal community. The story was posted on the newspaper's website at 1 p.m. Within an hour, It had been shared on social media dozens of times. By evening, it had been shared hundreds of times. The local television station, Channel 7 News, picked up the story for their 6 p.m. broadcast. News anchor Patricia Chen introduced the story with obvious interest in the irony. A judge known for his tough stance on drunk driving has been arrested for that very crime, Patricia announced. Judge Robert Thornton, who has sentenced hundreds of drunk drivers over his 15-year career, was arrested Tuesday night with a blood alcohol level of 0.12, significantly above the legal limit. The story included comments from local attorneys who had appeared in Judge Thornton's courtroom. Some expressed shock while others pointed out the hypocrisy of the situation. Defense attorney Michael Roberts, who had argued many cases before Judge Thornton, was interviewed for the story. Judge Thornton was known for showing no mercy to DUI defendants, Roberts said. He often told people that there was no excuse for drinking and driving. I hope he remembers those words when he's sitting in the defendant's chair. The story also included reactions from some of Judge Thornton's former defendants. Lisa Chen, the college student who had been sentenced by Judge Thornton 6 months earlier, was contacted by reporters. I remember sitting in his courtroom and crying as he sentenced me, Lisa said. He told me that my age and my future career plans were no excuse. He said the law applied to everyone equally. I guess we'll see if he really believes that now. Judge Thornton tried to avoid the media attention, but it was impossible. Reporters were calling his home, his office, and even his brother's house. They were waiting outside the courthouse and following him when he tried to go to work. Judge Thornton's wife, Margaret, was devastated by the news. She had found out about her husband's arrest from a neighbor who had seen it on the news, not from her husband himself. Margaret was a teacher at the local elementary school, and she was worried about how this would affect her job and their family's reputation in the community. How could you do this to us? Margaret asked her husband when he finally came home Wednesday evening. How could you be so stupid? Judge Thornton had no good answer. I made a terrible mistake, he said. I never thought this would happen. You sentence people for this crime every week, Margaret said. You've given speeches about how drunk driving destroys families, and then you go out and do the exact same thing. Their 2 adult children, who lived in other cities, learned about their father's arrest from news reports on social media. Both called home immediately, shocked and embarrassed by what they were seeing online. The story continued to grow throughout the week. National news websites picked up the story because of the irony involved. The headline, "Judge who sends drunk drivers to jail gets arrested for drunk driving," appeared on news sites across the country. Legal experts were interviewed about the case. Professor Sandra Martinez from the State Law School appeared on several news programs to discuss the implications. This case highlights the issue of judicial misconduct and whether judges should be held to higher standards. Professor Martinez explained. Judge Thornton has built his career on being tough on drunk drivers. Now he'll have to face the same legal system he's been part of for 15 years. The courthouse where Judge Thornton worked became a circus. Reporters waited outside every day, hoping to get a statement from the judge or from other court officials. Court employees had to walk past cameras and microphones just to get to work. Other judges in the courthouse were asked constantly for their opinions about the case. Most refused to comment, saying it would be inappropriate to discuss a pending legal matter. But privately, many were shocked and concerned about how this would affect the reputation of the entire court system. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who had worked with Judge Thornton on hundreds of cases, found herself in an awkward position. Her office would be responsible for prosecuting Judge Thornton, but they had a professional relationship going back many years. We will handle this case exactly the same way we handle all DUI cases, District Attorney Walsh announced at a press conference. The defendant's profession or status in the community will not affect how we prosecute this case. But everyone knew this case would be anything but normal. The media attention alone made it different from any other DUI case. Social media was filled with comments about the case. Many people expressed anger and called Judge Thornton a hypocrite. Others pointed out that everyone makes mistakes, and that he deserved the same consideration as any other defendant. A Facebook page called Justice for Judge Thornton's Victims was created, where people shared stories about being sentenced by the judge. Many of the posts were from people who felt Judge Thornton had been too harsh in their cases. One post read, "Judge Thornton sentenced me to 30 days in jail for my first DUI. He told me I was a danger to society. I lost my job because of the jail time. Now he gets arrested for the same thing. Where's the justice in that? Another post said, Judge Thornton destroyed my life with his harsh sentence. I hope he gets the same treatment he gave to the rest of us. But there were also people who defended Judge Thornton. Some pointed out that he had been a fair judge in non-DUI cases, and that one mistake shouldn't destroy his entire career. The local bar association called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. Lawyers who practiced in Judge Thornton's courtroom were concerned about how this would affect pending cases. Some defense attorneys were already filing motions to have their clients' DUI cases transferred to other judges. Attorney Sarah Kim, who had defended many clients in Judge Thornton's courtroom, filed a motion requesting a new trial for one of her clients who had been sentenced the month before my client's case was heard by a judge who was apparently drinking and driving himself, the motion stated. This calls into question whether Judge Thornton was fair and impartial in DUI cases, knowing that he was committing the same crime he was sentencing others for. The State Judicial Conduct Board announced they were opening an investigation into Judge Thornton's fitness to serve as a judge. This investigation would be separate from the criminal case and could result in Judge Thornton being suspended or removed from the bench permanently. Judge Thornton's lawyer, David Chen, no relation to the news anchor, advised his client to stay quiet and avoid any public statements. But the pressure was building from all sides. The local chapter of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD, called for Judge Thornton to resign immediately. How can someone who breaks the law he's supposed to uphold continue to serve as a judge? Asked MAD President Susan Miller. Judge Thornton has lost all credibility to sentence drunk drivers. By Friday, 5 days after the arrest, the story was still making headlines. Judge Thornton had not returned to work since Wednesday. The courthouse administrator announced that all of Judge Thornton's cases were being reassigned to other judges until further notice. The case had become about more than just one judge's mistake. It had become a symbol of hypocrisy in the justice system and raised questions about whether public officials should be held to higher standards than ordinary citizens. As the weekend approached, Judge Thornton sat in his home, essentially a prisoner of the media attention. Every time he tried to leave the house, reporters followed him. His phone rang constantly with interview requests. His email inbox was filled with messages from reporters, angry citizens, and people asking for comment. 2 weeks after Judge Thornton's arrest, the State Judicial Conduct Board met in an emergency session. The board consisted of 5 judges and 2 attorneys who were responsible for investigating complaints against judges and determining whether they were fit to continue serving. Board Chairman Judge Patricia Williams called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss the case of Judge Robert Thornton and determine what immediate action, if any, should be taken regarding his continued service on the bench. The board had already received dozens of complaints from attorneys, defendants, and members of the public calling for Judge Thornton to be suspended or removed from office. They had also reviewed news reports about the arrest and the public reaction. The allegations are serious, Judge Williams said. A sitting judge arrested for drunk driving raises questions about fitness to serve and public confidence in the judicial system. After 2 hours of discussion, the board voted unanimously to suspend Judge Thornton, pending the outcome of his criminal case and a full investigation into his conduct. The suspension would be without pay, and all of his cases would be permanently reassigned to other judges. The announcement was made at a press conference that afternoon. Effective immediately, Judge Robert Thornton is suspended from all judicial duties, Judge Williams announced. This action is necessary to protect the integrity of the court system and maintain public confidence in our judges. Judge Thornton learned about his suspension from his lawyer, David Chen, who called him at home. Robert, I have bad news. The Judicial Conduct Board has suspended you without pay. Judge Thornton had been expecting this, but it still felt like a punch to the stomach. After 15 years on the bench, his judicial career was effectively over, at least temporarily. What are our options? Judge Thornton asked. We can appeal the suspension, but honestly, it's unlikely to be overturned while you're facing criminal charges, Chen replied. Our focus needs to be on the DUI case. If we can get a favorable outcome there, we might be able to argue for reinstatement later. But Chen knew that even if Judge Thornton was found not guilty or received a light sentence, his judicial career was probably finished. The public reaction had been too negative. and too many questions had been raised about his fitness to serve. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office was preparing their case against Judge Thornton. Prosecutor Maria Santos had been assigned to handle the case. Santos was a 15-year veteran prosecutor who had appeared in Judge Thornton's courtroom many times over the years. "This is the most difficult case I've ever had to prosecute," Santos told her supervisor, District Attorney Jennifer Walsh. "I've worked with Judge Thornton for years. He's always been professional and fair to deal with." "That's exactly why we have to handle this case by the book," Walsh replied. "If we give him any special treatment, it will look like the system is protecting one of its own. We have to prosecute this case the same way we would prosecute any other DUI." Santos reviewed Officer Martinez's arrest report and the breathalyzer results. The evidence was solid. Judge Thornton had been driving erratically, failed field sobriety tests, and had a blood alcohol level of 0.12, significantly above the legal limit. From a legal standpoint, this is a straightforward DUI case, Santos concluded. The evidence is clear, and the defendant was obviously impaired. But Santos also knew that this case would be anything but straightforward. Defense attorney David Chen was one of the best DUI lawyers in the state. He would probably challenge every aspect of the arrest and try to create reasonable doubt about Judge Thornton's guilt. Chen was already preparing his defense strategy. He had reviewed the police report and the video from Officer Martinez's body camera. He was looking for any procedural errors or constitutional violations that might get the case dismissed. "The traffic stop appears to be valid," Chen told his assistant. Officer Martinez had reasonable suspicion to stop the vehicle based on reports of erratic driving. The field sobriety tests were conducted properly, and the breathalyzer results are within acceptable limits. Chen was also considering whether to request a jury trial or a bench trial. In a bench trial, Judge Thornton would be tried by another judge. In a jury trial, he would be tried by a jury of citizens from the community. A jury trial might be risky, Chen thought. The publicity has been so negative that it might be hard to find jurors who haven't already made up their minds about Judge Thornton's guilt. While the criminal case was being prepared, the consequences of Judge Thornton's arrest were rippling through the legal system. Defense attorneys were filing motions in dozens of cases, claiming that Judge Thornton's arrest called into question his fairness in previous DUI cases. Attorney Michael Roberts filed a motion on behalf of his client, James Parker, who had been sentenced by Judge Thornton 3 months earlier. "My client was sentenced by a judge who was apparently committing the same crime he was being punished for," the motion stated. "This creates a fundamental unfairness that requires a new trial." Similar motions were being filed in courts across the county. The state appellate court was being flooded with appeals from defendants who had been sentenced by Judge Thornton in DUI cases over the past several years. Legal experts were divided on whether these appeals would be successful. Professor Sandra Martinez from the state law school explained the issues in an interview with the local newspaper. "The question is whether Judge Thornton's personal conduct affected his ability to be fair and impartial in DUI cases," Professor Martinez said. "Some courts might find that a judge who was secretly committing the same crime he was sentencing others for could not be truly impartial. But other legal experts disagreed. A judge's personal life doesn't necessarily affect their ability to apply the law fairly," said retired Judge William Thompson. "Unless defendants can prove that Judge Thornton's sentences were unusually harsh or inappropriate, these appeals are unlikely to succeed." The uncertainty was creating chaos in the court system. The chief administrative judge had to reassign hundreds of cases to other judges. Court schedules were being disrupted, and trials were being delayed. Judge Thornton's former colleagues were also dealing with the fallout. Judge Mary Rodriguez, who worked in the courtroom next to Judge Thornton's, was constantly being asked by reporters for her opinion about the case. "I can't comment on a pending legal matter," Judge Rodriguez said repeatedly. But privately, she was shocked by Judge Thornton's arrest. "I worked with Robert for 10 years, she told her husband. "I never saw any signs that he had a drinking problem." Other judges were worried about how Judge Thornton's case would affect public trust in the judicial system. Judge Thomas Wilson, the chief judge of the county court, called a meeting of all judges to discuss the situation. "This case has damaged the reputation of our entire court system," Judge Wilson said. "We need to make sure that the public understands that Judge Thornton's actions don't represent the values of our judiciary. But rebuilding public trust would be difficult. The local newspaper was receiving letters to the editor every day from people expressing their anger about the case. One letter read, "How can we trust any judge after this? If Judge Thornton was willing to break the law while sentencing others for the same crime, how do we know other judges aren't doing the same thing?" Another letter said, "Judge Thornton's arrest proves that there are different sets of rules for different people. Regular citizens get harsh sentences, but judges get special treatment." The State Bar Association was also taking action. They announced that they were reviewing Judge Thornton's law license and considering whether disciplinary action was appropriate. "Attorneys and judges are held to high ethical standard," said Bar Association President Linda Davis. "A criminal conviction, especially for a crime that a judge regularly presides over, could result in suspension or revocation of a law license." Judge Thornton was facing the possibility of losing not only his judicial position, but also his license to practice law. After more than 20 years in the legal profession, he could be left with no way to earn a living in his chosen field. His wife Margaret was struggling with the financial implications of the situation. Judge Thornton's suspension meant they had lost his $180,000 annual salary. Their mortgage payments, car payments, and other expenses continued, but their income had disappeared overnight. "We might have to sell the house," Margaret told her husband. "I can't afford to keep up with all these payments on just my teaching salary." The stress was taking a toll on their marriage as well. Margaret was embarrassed to go to work at the elementary school where she taught. Parents and other teachers looked at her differently now. Some were sympathetic, but others seemed to blame her for her husband's actions. Their adult children were also struggling with the situation. Their daughter Sarah, who lived in Chicago, was a lawyer at a prestigious firm. She was worried that her father's arrest would hurt her own career. "People at my firm keep asking me about Dad's case," Sarah told her mother during a phone call. "I don't know what to say. It's humiliating." Their son Michael, who lived in Denver, was equally upset. "Dad always taught us to do the right thing," Michael said. "He was always lecturing us about responsibility and making good choices. How could he be such a hypocrite?" 6 months after his arrest, Judge Robert Thornton sat in the same courthouse where he had worked for 15 years. But this time he was sitting at the defendant's table, not behind the judge's bench. The courtroom was packed with reporters, former defendants, and curious members of the public who wanted to see how the case would end. Judge Patricia Rodriguez, who had been assigned to hear the case, called the court to order. Judge Rodriguez had worked alongside Judge Thornton for years, but she knew she had to put their professional relationship aside and treat this case like any other. "The court calls the case of State versus Robert James Thornton," Judge Rodriguez announced. Judge Thornton stood up next to his lawyer, David Chen. After months of considering their options, they had decided to enter a guilty plea. Chen had convinced Judge Thornton that fighting the charges would only prolong the media attention and make things worse for his family. "Your Honor," Chen said, "my client wishes to enter a plea of guilty to the charge of driving under the influence." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Many people had expected Judge Thornton to fight the charges, just as many of the defendants who had appeared before him had tried to do. Judge Rodriguez looked at Judge Thornton directly. "Mr. Thornton, do you understand that by pleading guilty you are admitting that you drove a vehicle while under the influence of alcohol?" "Yes, Your Honor, I understand," Judge Thornton replied. His voice was quiet, very different from the strong, authoritative tone he had used when he was the one wearing the judge's robes. "Has anyone forced you to enter this plea, or made any promises to you about what your sentence will be?" "No, Your Honor." Judge Rodriguez accepted the guilty plea and scheduled a sentencing hearing for 2 weeks later. During those 2 weeks, both the prosecution and defense would prepare their recommendations for what Judge Thornton's sentence should be. Prosecutor: Maria Santos had already decided to recommend the standard sentence for a first-time DUI offender with Judge Thornton's blood alcohol level. She knew that many people expected her to ask for a harsher sentence because Judge Thornton was a judge, but she believed the law should be applied equally to everyone. "We're recommending a fine of $2,500, 6 months license suspension, 100 hours of community service, and completion of an alcohol education program," Santos told the media after the plea hearing. "This is the same sentence we would recommend for any first-time offender in similar circumstances." Defense attorney Chen was preparing to ask for leniency during the sentencing hearing. He planned to present evidence of Judge Thornton's years of public service and his lack of any previous criminal record. Judge Thornton has served this community faithfully for 15 years, Chen told reporters. He made a serious mistake, but one mistake shouldn't destroy a lifetime of service to the legal system. Chen also planned to present letters of support from colleagues, community members, and people who had worked with Judge Thornton over the years. However, he was having trouble finding people willing to write such letters. Many of Judge Thornton's former colleagues were afraid that supporting him publicly would hurt their own careers. The 2 weeks between the plea hearing and sentencing passed slowly for Judge Thornton. He spent most of his time at home, reading about his case in the newspaper and watching news reports about himself on television. The man who had once been one of the most respected figures in the community was now a symbol of hypocrisy and fallen authority. Margaret Thornton had filed for divorce the month before. She couldn't handle the shame and embarrassment any longer. "I can't stay married to someone who destroyed our family's reputation like this," she told Judge Thornton when she moved out of their house. Their children had also distanced themselves from their father. Both had asked him not to contact them until the case was resolved. Judge Thornton was essentially alone, with only his brother David and his lawyer for support. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was even more crowded than it had been for the plea hearing. Many of Judge Thornton's former defendants had come to watch, hoping to see him receive the same harsh treatment he had given them. Lisa Chen, the college student who had been sentenced by Judge Thornton 6 months before his arrest, sat in the front row of the gallery. She had driven 3 hours from her new job to be there for the sentencing. "I want to see if he gets the same lecture he gave me," Lisa told the reporter sitting next to her. "He told me that there was no excuse for drunk driving and that I had to face the full consequences of my actions." Officer Sarah Martinez was also in the courtroom. She had been called as a witness during the investigation and wanted to see how the case ended. As she looked at Judge Thornton sitting at the defendant's table, she thought about how different he looked from the confident man she had arrested 6 months earlier. Judge Rodriguez called the court to order and asked if anyone wanted to speak before she announced the sentence. Prosecutor Santos stood up first. "Your Honor, the state recommends a sentence consistent with the guidelines for first-time DUI offenders. The defendant's blood alcohol level was 0.12, which is significantly above the legal limit. While we recognize his years of public service, the law must be applied equally to all citizens." Defense Attorney Chen then stood to speak on behalf of Judge Thornton. "Your Honor, my client has already paid a heavy price for his mistake. He has lost his career, his reputation, and his family. He is deeply remorseful for his actions and asks for the court's mercy." Judge Rodriguez then looked at Judge Thornton. "Mr. Thornton, do you wish to address the court before I announce your sentence?" Judge Thornton stood up slowly. For a moment he looked around the courtroom at all the faces staring at him. Many of these people had sat in this same courtroom when he was the judge, listening to him lecture them about their crimes. "Your Honor," Judge Thornton began, his voice shaking slightly, "I want to apologize to this court, to this community, and to everyone I have disappointed. I spent 15 years on this bench telling people that there was no excuse for drinking and driving. I believed those words when I said them, but I failed to live by them myself." He paused and took a deep breath. "I understand now what it feels like to sit in this chair. I understand the fear, the shame, and the regret that every defendant feels. I should have understood that before, but I was too focused on punishment and not enough on understanding." Judge Thornton continued, "I know that my actions have damaged the reputation of this court system and disappointed many people who trusted me. I accept full responsibility for my mistake, and I am prepared to face whatever consequences the court deems appropriate." When Judge Thornton sat down, Judge Rodriguez began to announce his sentence. "Mr. Thornton, you have pleaded guilty to driving under the influence. Based on the evidence and the guidelines for first-time offenders, the court sentences you as follows." The courtroom was completely silent as everyone waited to hear the sentence. "You are sentenced to pay a fine of $2,500. Your driver's license is suspended for 6 months. You must complete 100 hours of community service, and you must successfully complete an alcohol education program." Judge Rodriguez paused and looked directly at Judge Thornton. "Mr. Thornton, this sentence is exactly what you would have given to any other first-time DUI offender who appeared in your courtroom." The law applies equally to everyone, including former judges. The sentence was exactly what most legal experts had predicted. Judge Thornton had received the same punishment he had given to hundreds of other people over the years. There was no special treatment, but also no additional punishment because of his former position. After the sentencing hearing, Judge Thornton met with reporters outside the courthouse. It was the first time he had spoken publicly about his case since his arrest. "I want to apologize again to everyone I have let down," Judge Thornton said. "I hope that my case can serve as a reminder that no one is above the law, not even judges." When a reporter asked if he planned to try to return to the bench, Judge Thornton shook his head. "My judicial career is over. I need to figure out what to do with the rest of my life." 2 weeks after his sentencing, Judge Thornton formally resigned from his position as judge. In his resignation letter, he wrote, "I can no longer serve as a judge with the integrity and moral authority that the position requires. My actions have compromised my ability to fairly and impartially administer justice." The State Judicial Conduct Board accepted his resignation and closed their investigation. Judge Thornton would keep his law license, but finding work as an attorney would be difficult given his criminal conviction and the publicity surrounding his case. Judge Thornton began his community service at a local homeless shelter, serving meals and helping with cleanup. The irony was not lost on him that many of the people he was serving had probably appeared in his courtroom at some point. During his alcohol education classes, Judge Thornton met other people who had been arrested for drunk driving. For the first time in his life, he listened to their stories without judgment. He heard about people who had lost their jobs, their families, and their self-respect because of their mistakes. "I used to think that harsh sentences would deter people from drinking and driving," Judge Thornton told his counselor during one of his sessions.